Okay, today we're going to be learning Pesachim Daf Nun Daled. Today's daf is sponsored by Nancy Kaladny to Lisa Tawil Kaladny, our wonderful daughter-in-law, on the 25th anniversary of her becoming a member of our family. Lisa introduced me to Hadran and is my inspiration to start each day with Daf Yomi. And by Debbie Ziering and Rebecca Levy in honor of our dear friend Dodi Tobin, Miriam Dodi Bat Chani Yocheved. Rosh Chodesh is recognized as a special women's holiday. Dodi, your faith in Hashem inspires us all. And Bezrat Hashem, the merit of this Rosh Chodesh, together with the prayers of your many family and friends, should bring you a refuah shlema. And also refuah shlema to Hadar Bat Sharon Sheli. Okay, Chodesh Tov to everybody. With that, we will get started. I just want to say how amazing it is. We started the skills class in Hebrew last night. There were 200 women on the Zoom, and overall, over 930 people have registered for the course, which just shows how much there's an interest in learning Gemara. And God willing, we'll be able to have more courses like this and be able to take people on a new path to learning texts that they've never learned before, or maybe learned, but not as much in depth as they will over the coming years. So we will get started now with today's daf. This is one of those dapim that there's a few things I'll say before we start. Number one could spend a long time analyzing a lot of the things in this page, certainly from a perspective of Machshavit Israel, of philosophy, of trying to understand better what's going on. Again, Daf Yom Shir, we don't have enough time for that, but we'll kind of drop a few things. The other thing we're going to see about today's daf is that sometimes we take things for granted, that things are a particular way. And what we're going to see here is that in the time of the Mishnah or in the time of the Gemara, things were not as clear-cut as they are now. And you're going to hear all sorts of suggestions, as we started yesterday, with maybe you don't like candles on Erev Yom Kippur before Yom Kippur starts, even if it comes on Erev Shabbat, right? The thought of not lighting Shabbos candles, crazy thought, but maybe you don't, according to some. Maybe you don't make Havdalah on a candle on Yom Kippur when Yom Kippur ends, right? So we're suggesting all these things that it seems like it wasn't so clear that what we do today is what was always done. So we had this story of Rabbi Bar Chana, who was walking with Rabbi Abba and Ula, and Rabbi Abba puts them on the spot and says, hey, did you say in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that you only say Borei Merei Ha'esh, light a candle for Havdalah on Shabbat and not after Yom Kippur, right? Obviously, nobody thinks you're going to light a candle for Havdalah after Yantif, because Yantif, the whole idea, okay, now we're going to talk about, there's really two ideas for why one lights a candle, what makes a blessing on a candle after Havdalah. So one is, we're going to see, because the light, there was this idea that fire was created on Saturday night, and we're going to question that, but that's the concept, and therefore we say it's Saturday night, and that's what would lead one to say only on Saturday night and not any other time. However, there's also this idea that fire wasn't permitted to us, and now all of a sudden fire is permitted to us. Now that obviously isn't true on Yantif. And that's on Yantif, you don't have either one. You don't have fire is permitted on Yom Tov to use, right? As long as you have it from a fire that exists. And also, and obviously use it for things that you're allowed to use it for. And also it's not necessarily Saturday night, right? Obviously if it's Saturday night, then you would make a bracha on the candle. So this is what we're going to discuss. The other thing you should know is that nowadays on Yom Kippur, when we make Havdalah, we use what we call a ner sheshavat. That's going to come up in today's daf, which is you can only light it from a pre-existing light. You can only make a blessing on a candle that was lit from before Yom Kippur. We obviously don't do that every Shabbat, right? We light a new light, so a new fire. So we're going to talk about that difference also today. So we have this story, and they said, did you say really Rabbi Yochanan said it? And Ula gives a really dirty look to Rabbi Bar Chana, like, are you the one who said this? And Rabbi Bar Chana immediately understands what's happening and said, oh no, didn't say that he said that, right? I didn't say that he said that you only make a bracha on the candle on Motzei Shabbat and not on Yom Kippur. No, what I said, what didn't have to do with the candle after Yom Kippur, it had to do with the candle before Yom Kippur. What I said was that he said the rabbis forbid anyone from lighting a candle on Yom Kippur that falls out on Erev Shabbat. To which Ula said, oh, that I agree with. And now we're going to start with the last line on Nun Gimel Amud Bet. Kari ale Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef said about these two people, and one can try to think about where to go with this in different directions. He quotes a verse from Mishlei, Mayim amukim etza b'lev ish, like deep waters is the advice in the heart of a person, meaning sometimes people have a lot of things to say, but they keep them deep down and they don't say them. That was Ula, who didn't say what he wanted to say. He just reacted by staring him down. V'ish tfuna yidlena. Who's the one who knows how to understand these things? The one who's the ish tfuna, a wise person, will be able to bring it out. And that, so first of all, it's praising Rabbi Bar Chana that he was wise and he understood exactly what Ula was referring to when he gave him a dirty look. So what's not clear to me in this is this a derogatory statement about Ula that you shouldn't keep things inside, right? Typical psychologist talking, don't keep things inside, it's not healthy. Maybe that's it. Or is it saying, no, maybe, wise people keep things inside and it's for the people of understanding to know how to draw things out of people. In other words, that there's a certain skill attached to drawing information out of people. There's also psychologists, right? They can kind of try to get at what you're thinking, right? Now, a lot of us don't really know what always we're thinking deep inside of us. And you need someone wise to be able to pull it out of you. So it's unclear whether it's saying something negative about Ula, or maybe it's saying, no, that's okay that people leave things inside. It's just that sometimes we need to draw them out. But now back to our stories. So who are they holding like? In other words, where did we get this from that Rabbi Yochanan says this? Rabbi Binyamin Bar Yefet says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mivarchin al ha'or bein b'motzei Shabbat, bein b'motzei Yom Kippurim. We make a bracha on the candle, whether it's Motzei Shabbat or it's Motzei Yom Kippurim. V'chein amadavar is always one of my favorite things, right? And it's perfect in the middle of our chapter, all about minagim. And this is what the people do. If you look outside, you see that people are doing this. So chen amadavar, in other words, if it wasn't strong enough that you said it, this is what people are doing. So that even gives you more support to your opinion when you say this is what people are doing. And that's what we see, that you make a bracha on it, right? Whether it's Motzei Shabbat or whether it's on Yom Kippurim. They're obviously referring to the fact that they didn't think that Rabbi Yochanan said, it's not really, right? They didn't think that Rabbi Yochanan said that you only make it on Motzei Shabbat. They're not referring here to the second statement that they said Rabbi Yochanan said about Erev Shabbat, Erev Yom Kippur, lighting the candles. Meitive. Now we're going to bring a contradiction to this. Okay, so first they say, contradiction from this Braita. The Braita says, you only make a blessing on the fire on Motzei Shabbat. Why is that? Exactly as I said, because light was created on Motzei Shabbat. Sorry, not light, but fire. And now we're going into a different topic because we're just quoting the Braita, and the Braita continues and talks about a different element. And as I said, we're going to learn today certain things that you take for granted that weren't necessarily so taken for granted. Some people did things differently than we do them today. As soon as you see a candle after Motzei Shabbat, you make the bracha Borei Marei Eish, right? We always do it at the ceremony that we call Havdalah, right? This would kind of get in the way of all those nice ceremonies of people singing and all that. All of a sudden you get to the bracha and, oh, I already said it, right? We don't do this part. So he says, as soon as you see it, you make a bracha immediately. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Sodran ala kos. Rabbi Yehuda says, no. You put them all together in this ceremony, Havdalah ceremony, and you say them all at the same time, right? Because Havdalah is made up of several blessings. We make it on wine, right? That's just because we always make brachot on wine. We do mitzvot on wine. Then you have the bisamim, to smell the bisamim, you have the candle, and then you have the bracha of Havdalah. So according to the first opinion here, you really would you'd see a candle, you make a bracha, you'd see bisamim, you make a bracha, and then, then you take a cup, you make a bread pregafen, and you make a bracha of Havdalah. So in any case, our point about this was, it says here, you only say it on Motzei Shabbat. So they say, lo kashya, kam ba'or Shabbat, kam ba'or yotzei min ha'yitzim u'min ha'avanim. They say, when it said you only make a bracha on a candle on Motzei Shabbat, what it meant is on a candle with a fire that you light yourself after Shabbat. But in Yom Kippur, since you're not celebrating the day that it was created, and when you're on Motzei Shabbat, you're saying when it was created, that's when we're supposed to, right? We're supposed to commemorate the creation of fire. So we create a new fire. But in Yom Kippur, what we're supposed to commemorate is that we weren't allowed to use fire before, and now we can. So for that, you specifically have to use a fire that was lit before, that now you're allowed to use, because it's showing you something that was forbidden is now permitted. And therefore, you take a candle that was lit from before Yom Kippur. Tanechada. Another two contradictory Braitot, and now we're going to explain them. Right before was a Braita that contradicted Rabbi Yochanan that we explained. Now we're going to explain it as two Braitot that contradict. Or hayotzei min ha'yitzim u'min ha'avanim mevarchim alav. If it's fire that comes out of rocks and stones that you made yourself, then you make a bracha. A different braita says, you don't make a blessing on it. So they say, again, lo kasha, that's not difficult. Kam b'motzei Shabbat, kam b'motzei Yom Kippurim. The subject of each braita was different. One was talking about Yom Kippur, where you can't make it on a fire that you made yourself. And one was talking about Shabbat, where you can. Rebbe Mifazran, now we're going back to that machloka, which is just an aside about how do we do these blessings. So Rebbe would scatter them, meaning each one he would say when it happened. When he saw fire, he would make a bracha. When he saw b'samim, he would make a bracha. Rabbi Chia Mechadsan, he would put them all together in one ceremony. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi, this is a very interesting line. Alfa pisha Rebbe Mifazran, even though he would separate them, chozer v'sodran ala kos kedei lotzi banav u'bnei beito. But when he made Havdalah at home, in order to fulfill the obligation, to help everyone else fulfill their obligation, he would do it then in a ceremony. So he would end up, as soon as he saw fire after Shabbat, he would immediately make a bracha. This is what we call a bracha l'ne'ani. He saw something and made a blessing on it, or the b'samim, he saw them, made a blessing on it. But then when it came to with his family, he did it again. Now this is a little problematic, and that's why this line is interesting. Because generally a bracha l'ne'ani, if I made kiddush in the morning for myself, and then some of my kids come home and they want me to make kiddush for them again. So I can do that because that's a mitzvah and I'm allowed to do it a number of times to basically help someone else fulfill their obligation. But when I make hamotzi at the table and then someone else comes to the table, I can't make hamotzi for them again because hamotzi is what we call a bracha l'ne'ani. That's, I'm enjoying, I can't benefit from anything until I make a blessing on it. Once I make a blessing, I can't do another one. So what they say here is, and this is very interesting because these blessings, at least for sure the b'samim, it's a bit of a question about the candle, whether it's very hard to categorize these blessings. What are they? They're sort of in between because they're bracha l'ne'anim, but you specifically have to make sure you have one to benefit from them. So it's a little bit tricky. And the rabbi, so some people explain this, how can you possibly make a bracha twice? They say that because they put it together in this Havdalah ceremony, it became a chovah, becomes obligatory. Once it's like a bracha l'ne'anim that becomes obligatory. And because it becomes obligatory, therefore you're allowed to say it again to help someone else fulfill their obligation. So it's very interesting. It's quite an interesting topic about categorization of brachot and where does this fit in. Now we're getting to or b'motzei Shabbat ivrei. This is all premised on that fire was created on Saturday night. And now we're going to enter into all these interesting sources about when things were created. Partly we're going to quote from Pirkei Avot. So if you're familiar with Pirkei Avot, this will sound familiar to you. Was it really created on Motzei Shabbat? V'hatanya, 10 dvarim nivru'u be'erev Shabbat ben hashmashot. There were 10 things created on Friday afternoon, ben hashmashot, right? Where that safek yom, safek laila, we're not sure is it day, is it night, right? That's that in-between twilight hour. Now, what's the idea here that things were created erev Shabbat ben hashmashot? So first of all, what do I think of? I think of myself right before Shabbat starts, right? What do you do? All of a sudden you're like full speed, right? You're trying to get everything in as fast as you possibly can because you know you're running out of time. So if you take this analogy, now obviously we can't compare God to humans, but when the B'raitot, they look at God as if he's a human because they're trying to kind of see their experience, right? God's experience through their eyes. And what are they saying here? God created the world in 6 days. Right before Shabbat comes in, when God can no longer, right? God's going to rest now. All of a sudden, there were all these things that kind of didn't get done during the week. At that very last minute, all of a sudden, all these things were created. Okay, you imagine God like the last, right? Again, you can't really imagine God like this, but that's what the Midrash, this source is doing. That what didn't get in, what wasn't included that needed to be included. So here we go with our list. Eluhain, again, why these things and what, and one can philosophize about them. We're not going to have time to do that. Eluhain, Be'el, okay, the well where they got the water in the desert, the man, Haman, the keshet, the rainbow, ktav u'machtev, many different interpretations, whether it's different types of writing. The machtev, some people say, is the writing on the luchot that could be read from all 4 sides versus regular writing. There's many other interpretations. The ability to write versus the letters were created, all different options. No one really knows what it means. Luchot, okay, the tablets. Kvaro shel Moshe, where Moshe was buried, which nobody really knows. Ma'ara she'amad bo Moshe ve'Eliyahu, when Moshe, after Chet ha'egel, Moshe, the sin of the golden calf, Moshe says to God, I want you to tell me your ways. And then he says he goes by this Nikat Hatzor, by this rock, and they say it was a cave, and that was the same cave that Eliyahu hid from Izebel when she was trying to chase after him to kill him. Ptichat piaton, the fact that the donkey would be able to speak in the Bilam story, and Ptichat pia aretz livloa et harashaim, and the fact that the earth could open up to swallow up the bad people, right? This is with Korach. Rabbi Nechemia omer mishum aviv. Okay, so all these are like potentials opened up. They weren't used, obviously, at that time, but they were, the groundwork was being set for future events. That's maybe a simple way to say it. Again, lots of ideas of what you could say about this. Rabbi Nechemia omer mishum aviv. We have different opinions here, and now we're going to get to the problem one. Af ha'or v'hapered, fire and the mule. The mule is a cross between a horse and a donkey. The mule, right, which is a crossbreed, which we'll see later, right? Crossbreeds aren't necessarily so, right? You know, it's all the animals were created, but this crossbred animal was created also at the very last minute, as was fire. So here you see it was created Friday and not Saturday night. So we're going to have to explain this. But in any case, we're continuing in the source. Rabbi Yoshi Omer Mishum Aviv, Af Ayel v'Hashamir. The Ayel is the ram that Abraham used at the Akedah instead of Yitzchak. And the Shamir was this worm that was able to bite, was like, they used it to carve out things in the temple because you're not allowed to use metal implements. So they used this type of worm that was able to kind of, right, it could split rocks and it could do all sorts of things. So it was a very strong worm. So they used the worm for all sorts of things in the temple. So this is also kind of setting the groundwork. Interesting, they compare the Akedah and the temple because they say it was at Har Moriah. This idea that both these things had set the groundwork for that. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Af Hatzvat. Okay, this is my husband's favorite line. The tongues. Okay, why is this a funny thing? So why were tongues have to be created then? Because how do you create tongues? So you put them, you boil them up, right? You boil up you heat it up, and then you have to take it out and put it into cold water and that kind of, you know, put it in cold, or you put it in fire furnace. How do you get it out? You use tongues to get it out. Well, how are you going to use tongues to create the first tongues? If you don't have tongues, how are you going to use? So, right, it's the classic question, how do you order a telephone if you don't have a telephone, right? So these are like funny situations that husband always likes to quote. So anyway, Rabbi Yehuda says, Afatzvat hu haya omer. He would explain why they have to be created right before, you know, Shabbat, because tzvata b'tzvata mit abda, right? A tongue is created with tongues. Utzvata kamaita man avid, and who created the first one? Hi, lie. It must be bria b'fnei b'yidei shamayim. It must be God created it, because there's no other way it could have been created. Amarle, they said to him, no, that's not true. Efshar yasen b'tfus v'yikvena kevan. You could have made it with a mold. It's a different way to make it. You don't have to make it in that way. And therefore, halai, bria b'dei adamu. It really is created by man. That's not something that God needed to create. In any case, what are we back to? We said that fire was created on Motzei Shabbat. And in this source, it says, according to one opinion, fire was created on Friday. So lo kasha. Ha ba'or didan, ha ba'or de gehenom. This wasn't getting crazy enough. So now they say, oh, that was the fire of hell. Okay. Or didan b'motzei Shabbat, and or de gehenom be'erev Shabbat. Our fire we created ourselves, but the fire of Gehenom God created. When did He create it? It must have been on Friday. So Becky, hold off on your question. We're going to get there. Okay, good that you asked. Okay, so now they say, wait a minute. Or de gehenom be'erev Shabbat ivrei. Or of Gehenom was created. The fire of hell was created on erev Shabbat. V'hatanya, doesn't it say in a Braita? Shiva dvarim nivru kodem shenivra olam. What do you mean? There's 7 things that were created before the world was created. Now, what's the significance of things being created before the world was created? Well, again, one could say many things. I'm going to say one thing, which is if things were created, what was created before the world, meaning the world can't exist without the following things. This is the foundation of the world. What's the foundation? So part of this is going to be reward and punishment, right? Without that, how are people going to function in the world? They need a framework. So these are the 7 things that were created before the world was created. The Elohim, Torah, tshuva, the ability to repent, Gan Eden, Gehenom, Kisei Kavod, okay, the holy seat of God, Ubeit HaMikdash, the temple, Ushmo Shel Mashiach, and the name of the Mashiach. In other words, that's for the future, right? For what's going to be. So Torah, Dechtiv, how do we know this? We're going to quote all these verses that show it. Hashem Kanani Reshit Darko. Okay, it's a pasuk in Mishlei. It's unclear exactly how this connects to Torah, but they're assuming based on the verses, it's actually many verses later, it talks about something that could be understood as the Torah. And therefore it says, oh, God acquired this Bereshit Darko from the very beginning. Okay, anything that's going to say from the very beginning is going to mean before the world was created. Tshuva, repentance. Dichtiv b'terem harim yuladu. It says before the mountains were born, okay, meaning before they were created. Uchtiv, and there it says, Teshev enosh ad dakav v'tomer shuvu b'nei adam. Okay, people will sit and they will say, right, people can repent. So that concept was before the world was created. Gan Eden, okay, the Garden of Eden. Dichtiv, vayita Hashem Elohim gam be'eden mikedem. It says God planted the Garden of Eden from before. So they mean from before what? Before creation. Gehenom, hell, dichtiv, ki aruch me'atmol tafta. We saw that tafta was a verse that talked about, meant hell. And we've seen this before in the sugya when we talked about Gehenom. And aruch me'atmol, it was already set up from yesterday. Kisei kavod u'beit hamikdash, these two go together. Dichtiv, kisei kavod marom me'rishon makom mikdashenu. Kisei kavod is again, Mei Rishon, from before, the place of our mikdash. So both of those are in the verse with this Mei Rishon. So they say from the beginning. Shmo shemashiach dichtiv, yihi shmo la'olam lifnei shemesh inon shmo. His name will be forever before the sun, meaning before the creation of the sun. Inon shmo, that's the name of the Mashiach. Amrei. So how do we explain this? If this was created before the world, how can you say the fire that was created on Friday was the fire of hell if hell was already created from before Shabbat? So the answer, Amrei chalelahu dinivra kodem shenivra ha'olam v'ordidei be'erev Shabbat. The space for Gehenom, in other words, the infrastructure was created before, but the fire of hell wasn't yet created until Friday afternoon. Now, by the way, why Friday afternoon? And we'll talk about this soon, because once man is created, then you need the fire of Gehenom. There's no point for the fire before man is created. That's why also some of these things that were created only after the end, besides it being the last chance, as I described it before, and we're going to see this going with the next source, is that it's not just the last chance, it's that also once man was created, there was a need for all sorts of other things, right? So the fire of Gehenom was needed only at that point. But wait a minute. Okay, so we have the hole or the space, the base, the foundations for hell were created before Shabbat. Friday, right before Shabbat, fire of hell. Motzei Shabbat, right after Shabbat, the fire that humans use. But they're going to have a question on this fire of Gehenom being created on Friday, because we're going to say, as Becky, you asked before, or didei be'erev Shabbat ivrei, the fire of Gehenom was created on Friday. V'hatanya, Rabbi Yossi Omer, it says in a Braita, Rabbi Yossi says, or shabara kadosh baruch hu b'sheni b'Shabbat, ein lo kviya la'olam. The fire that God created on the second day of creation will never go out. Why then the second day? Shneimar vayatzu v'ra'u. Oh, so first of all, how do we know it will never go out? That's from a pasuk in Yeshayahu. Vayatzu v'ra'u b'pigrei anashim haposhim bi. They're going to go out and see the bodies of the people who sin to me, okay, the really evil people. Ki tola'atam lo tamut v'isham lo tichbeh. Their fire will never go out. Va'amar Rabbi Bena'a b'reit Rabbi Ula mipnei ma lo ne'emar ki tov b'sheni b'Shabbat. Now we're going to see what was unique about Monday. It doesn't say that God saw everything was good. Why did not see it was good? Because because something bad was created on that day, which was the fire of Gehenom. So Rabbi Elazar says, well, even though it didn't say Kitov and Sheni, it was made up on the sixth day. And why is that? On Friday, it says it was Tov Ma'od. That makes up for the lack of Tov being in the second day. And Shneimar, right? So because it says that, Ella. So now, what's the idea of it all of a sudden? The Or of Gehenom being good? Well, again, once man was created, or man and woman, then already there was this potential for the fire to do its job in a positive way. In other words, and deal with, to create an environment that people won't sin, right? So the idea of hell, again, whether we believe in hell the way, right, we always think of hell in the very Christian ideology about hell. It also comes up, and we've seen this in other sources, this comes up in Jewish sources. Again, it's a bit of a fear tactic, right? That they use these images to scare people into doing mitzvot, okay? Again, this is for a different class about what the idea of hell in Judaism and what, I'm sure there's a lot written about that. I don't have as much to add to about that. But it's a good questions to be asking about, how do we, these Gemaras don't exactly sound Jewish in nature to us the way we normally think about things. In any case, now we're stuck because before creation, we had the space of hell being created. Second day, we have the fire. Motzei Shabbat, we have our fire. What's Friday afternoon's fire? So that's what we're left with. So again, we'll read it inside. Chalala kodem shenivra olam, or didei, the or of Gehenom from the fire there, b'sheni b'Shabbat on the second day, or didam b'machshava lali barot be'erev Shabbat. What do they say? This is fascinating. The idea, the concept that man could create fire on his own came up in God's thoughts to create on Friday afternoon. V'lo nivra ad Motzei Shabbat, but it wasn't yet created till Motzei Shabbat. Tanya, we'll talk about this concept in a minute. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Shnei dvarim alu b'machshava libarot be'erev Shabbat. There were two things that came up, two ideas, and these are the exact ideas we saw before. V'lo nivru ad Motzei Shabbat, right? Ve'umotzei Shabbat. Natan Akadosh Baruch Hu de'ah b'adam harishon me'ein dugma shamala. This is a great line. On Motzei Shabbat, God gave man knowledge. This is why we talk about in Atachon Antanu, we talk about the idea of the ability to distinguish. We say on Saturday nights between, right? It's this idea that we can distinguish between things. We have knowledge. Specifically on Motzei Shabbat, God gave man knowledge, me'ein dugma shamala, like God, to be like God. What is unique about these two things? These two things are man acting like God. In other words, the first week was God's week. As soon as God's week ends, it becomes our turn. We get to be mini creators. And that's why these two things, that's what these two things symbolize. It's our ability to create, to be creative, to be like God. Okay, it's a great midrash. Now, the problem is that this pered is kind of, it's looked at positively here, but we're going to see in a minute that it's not necessarily always looked at as so positive, because there's a different opinion. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer, pered b'imei ana haya. The mule was not created by man right after Shabbat, but it was created in the days of Ana, who was the son of one of the descendants of Esav. Shenemar hu ana asher matzat hayemim b'midbar. He found the yemim in the desert. They understand that to mean he created the mule. Dorshei chamurot hayu omrim ana pasul haya. Okay, the people who, there's different interpretations of what it means, Dorshei chamurot. I'm not going to get into it, but they would say pasul. He was pasul. He was a bad. Okay, we're going to see what he was pasul about. He was a mamzer. Lefichach hevi pasul la'olam, and that's why he brought something that was not a good thing to the world. How do we know he was a mamzer? Shenemar ele b'nei se'ir chori, and it lists in the children. It lists Ana and Sivon. And then it says, Uchtiv ele b'nei Sivon v'aya v'ana. And then it says, Aya and Ana were the sons of Sivon. So how could he be his brother and his son? Ela melamed Shabbat Sivon alimo v'holim mimena Ana. It must be that Sivon slept with his mother and had Ana. So Ana was both his brother and his son. And that's why we say he was a mamzer, and that's why he brought the pered to the world, meaning the pered wasn't created on Motzei Shabbat according to him. V'dilma Ana havu. They said that maybe there were two people named Ana. Maybe one was his brother and one was his son. Right? It could happen. Amarava amina milta deshavra malka lo amara umanu Shmuel. You could amara papa amina milta deshavra malka lo amara umanu Rava. They each said, I'm going to say something that even Shavra Malka, he comes up even, I remember he ends a Masechet, even like comes at the very end. He was this king of a Persian king who was well respected among the Jews. And what they're saying is, even a king like Shavra Malka didn't say, I'm going to say something even a king like Shavra Malka didn't say. What they really mean by Shavra Malka is they really mean that a big rabbi didn't say. And they're saying like the king wouldn't say. It's like saying, I'm going to say something even the king wouldn't say. What king were they referring to? So one was Rava was referring to Shmuel, or if it was Rav Papa was saying it, he was referring to Rava. Anyway, what are they going to say? Amakra hu ana. When it introduces Ana, it says he is Ana. What did they learn from hu ana? He's the Ana. Hu ana meikari. He's the same Ana that we discussed before. He's not anybody else, and therefore he must have been a bastard and born from his brother with his mother. Tanu Rabbanit. Another source about these 10 things that were created on Erev Shabbat. Asarat dvarim nivreu be'erev Shabbat ben hashmashot ve'eluhen be'er uman keshet ktav ha'machtev haluchot kivro shel Moshe u'ma'ara she'amar bo Moshe ve'Eliyahu pticha pi atom pticha pi haaretz v'lo et harishayim. It's the exact same list we saw before. I'm not going to go through them. V'yesh omrim maklo shel Aharon shkedei u'prachea, the staff of Aaron that he used in the story of Korach and there, and yesh omrim af mizikim, even the mizikin, right? The evil spirits were created then. Yesh omrim af bigdo shel adam harishon, right? When he covered himself up, okay, maybe his clothes also. Tanu Rabbanan, another source. Shiv'at dvarim, okay, we're now getting into lists of 7 things because we talked about 7 things. Other things about It's a little bit about creation, but more about the world itself. Again, very interesting things that that people will never understand properly. Eluhain, or people will never know what they are. Yom Hamitah, the day of death, we will never know what that is. Yom HaNechama, the day that the future, the Nechama, good things will happen, right? Meaning like the future redemption. Omek Hadin, the depth of judgment. Not clear what this means, whether it means people don't really understand how to judge properly, or maybe it means the deen of the future, what's going to be when God judges everyone. You'll never know what your friend thinks. It was reminds me of this book that was my daughter's favorite book called Hamachshavot Shel Maya. And this girl wanted people to understand what she was thinking. And then everyone knew what she was thinking. And her teacher said, oh, I see you're bored in class, or I see you're this, and she got into big trouble and said, maybe I'm better off that people don't know what I'm thinking. Anyway, so here you have, nobody really knows what their friend is thinking. Right? What's people's biggest problem in life, right? How am I going to get parnasa? How am I going to have money to live? When will the rule of David come back, the Davidic dynasty? When will our enemy, right, the people ruling over us, when will their reign end? Okay, these are things people will never know. Tanu Rabbanit. Okay, these are things that came up for people to create, or it came up for God to create. In other words, God wanted to create these things, and if not, it should have. In other words, these are brilliant things. Okay, thank God for them. Okay, this is very interesting. That a dead body will rot and stink. Now, why is that? So they say because if it didn't, imagine someone in your family died. Now, it's hard for us to imagine this, but theoretically, you want them to be with you forever. So you leave them in your house. And that's not a good thing, because you'll never get over it if you see it every day, right? It's hard enough for people to deal with loss that sometimes they do, right? You often feel it on a daily basis, but imagine if it was in your face every day, it would be even harder to get over it. So therefore they made it that the body will rot, so that, right? The idea is that God must have done this because it's so brilliant and it helps you to get over it. Okay, even though we all know this isn't really true, the mate never really gets forgotten from your heart, but it does get easier over time. So that concept that time heals, that also is a brilliant concept that, if you really think about it, you think, who said it was going to be this way? It didn't necessarily have to be that way. And this is another interesting one. If the grains didn't rot over time, what would happen? Okay, this reminds me of a story of a situation. I went on Erev Rosh Hashanah. It was a 3-day holiday, which in Israel, people aren't used to those, so people go crazy. I went to the store to buy lettuce. There was a huge shortage of lettuce a few years ago. You guys might remember, people who live around here might remember. And I went to the store to buy, and there were, maybe 4 packages of lettuce left in the store. And I said to myself, well, I need 4 packages of lettuce, but is it appropriate for me to buy 4 packages of lettuce and leave nothing for anybody else? And, what if I don't end up using it even? It could be, I think I need it, but maybe I don't need it. And then it'll rot in my fridge, and then other people wouldn't have used it. So that's the idea here. If produce wouldn't rot, people would store it forever. And then there would be this big problem that nobody would end up being able to access the food, right? Because people would hoard it, and that would leave nothing for anybody else. I see Shoshana is writing about the vaccine, right? It's this idea of people hoarding things for themselves, right? And then not allowing and creating a shortage for other people. So the fact that it will rot makes it more difficult for people to hoard it, right? Maybe the fact that the vaccine has to be kept at such high temperatures at least prevents some people from trying to hoard vaccines. And anyway, okay, food for thought. Okay, some people say also about coins. Actually, I don't remember exactly what the meaning of this one is. But the coins that, I guess just this idea that we could use money. Right, because if we only traded items, I think the idea is that, right, they say there would be, again, there must be other interpretations of this. How could poor people make money if they don't have crops and things like that? That there have to be other ways to deal with things. Okay, so now that's the end of this whole interesting section, which again, there's a lot to say, but we're going to have to, right, I see someone's writing it could be right, circulating money, things like that. Okay. Now we're going to, right, you think about Bitcoin, right? Or something like that. Okay, new Mishnah, new topic. Makom shenagu la'asot melacha b'tisha b'av osim. Makom shenagu shelo la'asot melacha ein osim. Apparently, some people had accustomed not to work on Tisha B'av, and other people had accustomed to work on Tisha B'av. So everybody does according to their minhag. U'bechol makom talmidei chachamim b'teilim. However, Talmidei Chachamim across the board, wherever you live, they always are careful not to work. Okay, it's like that doesn't have to do with minhag makom, that has to do with who you are. Comes Rashbag and he says something interesting. Rashbag omer la'olam yaseh adam atzmo talmid chacham. You should always make yourself a talmid chacham. Okay, now what does this mean? You should make yourself a talmid chacham. It means you should not do work, and we're going to see a reference to this in the Gemara later. It's only like a reference from the side. That's why I'm going to kind of say it now, which is the idea is that you might have thought it's a problem because it might look like what we call yohora. Yohora means that you're kind of saying, "Oh, I'm better than you. I'm gonna act like a talmid chacham even though I'm not, and I'm not going to work." But they say on Tisha B'Av, it's good if you do that. It's not perceived as you're trying to say, "I'm a talmid chacham." In other words, even if you live in a place where everyone's working, you can still not work, and it won't be perceived as, "Oh, I'm better than you that I don't work." Again, this could be connected with the beginning of the parak where we talked about not working isn't necessarily looking like I'm being arrogant because you're just not doing something. Okay, Amar Shmuel. Now Shmuel makes this statement, which we're going to have to try to understand. Ein ta'anit tzibor beBavel ela Tisha B'Av bilvad. In Bavel, you don't have fast, only Tisha B'Av. What on earth does this mean? They didn't have fast. Most people say that what they mean is they don't have fast for rain. And what they mean is they don't have severe fast for rain. The fast for rain, we're going to learn this all in Masechet Ta'anit, that whenever they didn't have rain, so they would start a slew of fasts. And first they would do 3 fasts on a Monday, Thursday, Monday. It's called Bahab. And then they would wait a little. If the rain didn't come, they'd institute more fasts. And as the fast went on, they got more and more severe. Right? First they were fasts like our regular fasts, and then they became also starting at night and other issues. So people wouldn't do work. Okay, at a certain point, they become very severe. So now, he says in Bavel, they don't ever get to that severity. So different opinions, maybe because in Bavel, they never had need for rain, so it was fine. That's one option. Another option is that even if, okay, so let's say they don't have problems with rain, but they might have problems with something else that you need to institute fast. But for those, we don't institute public fasts like we do in the others because that's not as serious a problem that affects things across the board. That's more of a private problem. Another option is to say, and this is a totally different approach, that they can't institute because their courts don't have enough power. So in order to institute a fast, you have to be a powerful court, and that can only be in Israel. So there's a difference between do they not need it or are they not capable of doing it because of that. Okay, in any case, let's move on. He says the only stringent fast really that you have in Bavel is Tisha B'Av. So let's try to figure out what he means by this. What's the element of severity that's only in Tisha B'Av and not in these other fasts in Bavel? L'meimer desavar Shmuel. Oh, and by the way, another relevant of the differences is if you say that it's because Bavel didn't have rain, didn't have problems with rain, then some other place in exile that has in the diaspora that has problems of rain, like Israel, then theoretically could institute fast. But if you say it's because they don't have a court that's powerful enough, if they don't have then you wouldn't say that in Chutz La'aretz. Okay. Anyway, let's move on. L'meimer desavar Shmuel Tisha B'Av ben hashmashot shelo asur. Are you trying to say that Shmuel says that what would be the severity? That not only does it start at night, but even ben hashmashot, that in between twilight hour, which we're never sure where it goes, that we're going to say it's also forbidden on Tisha B'Av. But only Tisha B'Av are we going to say that. But it can't possibly be. Because Ha'amar Shmuel, Tisha B'Av ben hashmashot shelo mutal. Again, we're seeing something that's not true today anymore. We start Tisha B'Av early, but he says you only start Tisha B'Av from, let's say, the time Shabbat would end, right? Seder Kochavim. So, can't possibly be then that that's what he meant about the severity. If you want to say maybe he thought that that all those other fasts really don't start at Ben Hashmashot either, and therefore he was talking about some other thing that Tisha B'Av, that only Tisha B'Av has this level of severity, didn't have to do with Ben Hashmashot, because even the other fasts you don't start Ben Hashmashot. It's not true. You can't say that because Ha'anan Tanan, it says in the Mishnah in Ta'anit, Ochlim v'shotimi ba'od yom. You eat and you drink from before when it's still day. Now, still day means before twilight, right? Why does it say mi ba'od yom? Is it not to say lav l'me'ute ben hashmashot, which would mean all the other fasts in Israel, right, are ben hashmashot, which would mean if Tisha B'Av and Bavel is the only one with that severity, it should include ben hashmashot. And then Shmuel makes no sense because he contradicts himself. So they say no. It's to say eat during the day because you can't eat starting once it's night, really night, dark at night. So Nema Maseh, let us suggest that this supports the following, that we can support it from the following source. Support Shmuel. Ein bein Tisha B'Av liyom Kippurim, ela shezo sveko asur v'zo sveko mutar. There's only one difference between Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av, and that's that a doubtful case is forbidden, and on Tisha B'Av it's permitted. What would be a doubtful case? My sveko mutar, lav ben hashmashot. Wouldn't that be if you're not sure, is it Tisha B'Av or not in terms of day or night, right? That whole in-between time. And then that would go again, right? Then that would support Shmuel that Tisha B'Av ben hashmashot is permitted. So they say, lo, you can't necessarily say that supports. No, what it means is for determining when the new moon is, meaning, this is fascinating. So like you said about something else, you would say the same thing here, that what? If you're not sure when the new moon was, so Yom Kippur, you have to keep 2 days. Tisha B'Av, you only have to keep 1. Now, you might say, what are you talking about? 2 days of Yom Kippur? Where do we get that from? So Tosfot says, can't possibly be, that's what it means. But he says it would mean if you're in a desert and you have no idea what day Yom Kippur is, then you'd have to, right? If you're not sure if it's one day or the other, then you would have to keep. And as we don't have it ever that, everyone in Chutz La'aretz has to keep 2 days of Yom Kippur, don't get nervous. But he does say if there could be unique situations, or let's say you fasted on Yom Kippur and then found out that it was the wrong day that you did it. So you would have to make it up the next day and actually fast 2 days. But Tisha B'Av, you wouldn't have to do that. You already fasted 1 day, that will cover you even if it ends up the wrong day. And then it has nothing to do with Ben Hashmashot, and then it doesn't prove Shmuel. But we're left with the Shmuel says, Ben Hashmashot is mutal on Tisha B'Av. We're now going to see a different opinion. Darash Rava taught, Ubarot u'menikot mitanot u'mashlimot bo. Comes to Tisha B'Av, pregnant women, nursing women who don't have to fast on the other fast do have to fast on Tisha B'Av. The mashlimot means they finish the fast. They have to fast the whole day. Obviously not if there's some dangerous situation and it's a medical issue. Just like on Yom Kippur. There are those, by the way, who say nowadays things are different and it's dangerous and maybe, you shouldn't. There are different opinions. But it's not mainstream, but there are those who say that. Okay, and the Ben Hashmashot is forbidden. This is the different from what Shmuel said. Shmuel said Ben Hashmashot is allowed. He says, like we do, that Ben Hashmashot is not allowed. And then it says, they also said this in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. So now the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan really have said that Ben Hashmashot is forbidden? Rabbi Yochanan, didn't he say, Tisha B'Av eino ketani tzibur? Tisha B'Av is not like the other fasts. Now, right, the severe fast. Now, what would you assume this means? My love, the Ben Hashmashot. Wouldn't you assume it means Ben Hashmashot? And then how could he say that Ben Hashmashot is forbidden? Didn't Rabbi Yochanan say it's less severe? And less severe, we assume Ben Hashmashot. So now we're going to bring 4 different options as to what he could have meant that wouldn't have to do with Ben Hashmashot, which means he would still say Ben Hashmashot is forbidden, but what this meant was a different comparison. Lo lemalacha. Maybe it means Tisha B'Av is not forbidden to do work, but the other fasts it is. So malacha tanina, you can't say that because it says malacha explicitly in our Mishnah. What does it say? Makom shnagu la'asot malacha b'tisha b'av osim. Makom shnagu shelo la'asot ein osim. Right? So meaning it's a minhag. It's certainly not forbidden. And then afilu Rashbag, even Rashbag, who says really no one should work, right? You should make yourselves talmidei chachamim. Lo amar ela d'chiyati v'lo avi lo mechzik yora. What he was saying is if you just sit and don't do anything, it won't look like you're being arrogant. Aval meser lo aser, but he didn't forbid it, which means it's very clear from the Mishnah that it's not forbidden, which means Rabbi Yochanan wouldn't need to tell us this because it's obvious from the Mishnah. Ela ma'i no ketani tzibor. So option number 3, what does it mean, not ketani tzibor? Option number 2, litfilat ni'ilah. It means that it's not like a tani tzibor that you don't say ni'ilah. If you ever notice this, Tisha B'Av doesn't have all the same criteria. We don't say slichot on Tisha B'Av like we say on other fasts. In those days, they had ni'ilah on other fasts. They don't have ni'ilah here. So, or ni'ilah was on those particular fasts, right? So anyway, we say, litfilat ni'ilah. So then they say, what? Wait, but Rabbi Yochanan himself said, you could daven all day long, better even if you want on Tisha B'Av, which means you could obviously say ni'ilah. So they say, no, hatam chova hacha reshut. That's, you're obligated to say ni'ilah on the other fast. Tisha B'Av, you're not obligated. You can if you want, but that's not the same. So maybe that's what he said. Or yibayit ema, my eno ketani tzibor le'esrim va'arba'a. In those days, they would daven 24 blessings for Shemona Esrei. They would add an extra 6 blessings on these special fast days. And therefore, right, that doesn't exist on Tisha B'Av. Rav Papa Amal, my eno ketani tzibor. Now, this is a totally different approach than all the others. because all the others were saying Tisha B'Av is less severe than those severe Taniyot Tzibor. But remember, I told you the Taniyot Tzibor had less severe days and then more severe as the drought went on. So, Eno Taniyot Tzibor, Eno Karishonot, Ela Ka'achronot. They're not like the first days, they're more like the severe second days, which means it's strict in all elements, also Ben Hashmashot, right, and all the others. So, Vasura. So now they say, right, it's good that we're learning this on a day that we haven't had rain in over a month in Israel, and now it's raining today. So it's very apropos. Meitive. Now we're going to bring one last contradiction to Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, who said Ben Hashmashot is forbidden on Tisha B'Av. Ein ben Tisha B'Av liyom kippurim elas zesveko asur v'zesveko mutar. That was exactly the source we brought before. My sveko mutar. What does it mean? La ben Hashmashot shelo. Isn't it not ben Hashmashot? Rav Shisha Bered Rav Idi lo l'kliya diarche. If you remember before, we said just like he answers it there. Likewise, he'll say it here. Now this is where he answered it. He said, "Oh, that source doesn't contradict Rav and Rabbi Yochanan because that source meant if you're confused about the day, then Tisha B'Av you wouldn't have to do again. Yom Kippur you would, but it doesn't mean Ben Hashmashot, and therefore it's not a contradiction." So here we have it. We're finished for today. We'll stop here. We'll pick up from here tomorrow. Chodesh Tov, everybody. Hope you enjoy the rain today. If it hasn't come, it will come. Looks like we have rain on our forecast for the week. Okay, have a great day, everyone.